Hi, I just wanted to jump in really quick before the book rankings and talk about what I'm hoping to do with this channel because this is the first video that's going to go online, and I want to say hi, thank you for clicking on this video, and kind of explain a little bit about what I'm hoping Writing Rambles will be. Basically, I've wanted to create a channel like this for a really long time, but I didn't know exactly what focus I wanted to take because I like so many different kinds of stories that I didn't really want to make just a book channel or just a movie channel. I wanted to create a space where I could talk about anything. I've loved seeing video essays as a genre of YouTube video grow over the last few years. It's so cool to see so many different creatives just make content about anything that's kind of interesting them at the moment. And that's what I'm hoping this channel will be. I'm going to focus mainly on books, anime, movies and TV shows, like live action ones, really anything, any kind of story that catches my eye. Some video games and board games, some musicals. Some of these would be way down the line. Some of them I'm working on right now. I'm just really excited about the ability to just talk about stories that have really meant a lot to me or have really strong writing in them. If any of those sound like they're up your alley, I hope that you follow my channel so that as I come out with more videos, you can join me in talking about stories that have really captured our attention. So without further ado, here is my rankings of the books that I've read this year. A few things that I want to say before I describe the tiers. I, this year, really wanted to just focus on getting back into reading. I wasn't necessarily in a slump in 2024, but I was really kind of bogged down by my job. I didn't have a lot of creative energy for reading or for creating, even though I really wanted to be doing those things. And I read some great books in 2024, but I really wanted 2025 to be like a mood reader year because I wanted to create a momentum of reading. I also started out the year pregnant. I knew my energy was gonna go up and down, and then of course having my baby kind of flipped everything around as well, and so I knew that things were gonna get a little crazy. I wanted the books that I was reading to really be sometimes escapism. I wanted them to be more of the entertainment variety of books this year. I did read some books that just blew me away and were really fun to experience. I hope that you enjoy the books that I read in 2025.
My name is Maddy, and welcome to Writing Rambles.
So here you can kind of see the different things that I read. I read 31 books over the course of this year. I have 26 pictures here to sort because I took an 8-book series and I split it into 3 parts. To really quickly explain my tiers, if you're familiar with New Girl, you might recognize these. Even though they're not direct quotes, they are references to specific scenes. So the first one I have is No Notes. This is a reference to Nick finishing his first draft of the Pepperwood Chronicles, and he asks Schmidt to read it and then give feedback. And Schmidt's response is,
No notes.
No notes.
No notes.
No notes?
No notes.
No notes.
No notes.
No notes.
No notes. It's perfect.
the books that are going to go in here just blew me away for whatever reason, right? It's not that I don't have any notes because I usually do, but it doesn't matter for these books. They were either exactly the right vibe that I needed, so much so that I just fell in love with it. I could reread it however many times and it's just one of my favorites, or I was so invested in like the technical aspect of the writing that these are the kind of stories that I go, man, I wish that I could come up with something that's as good as this because this is golden. This is alchemy. This is amazing. Even though maybe there were some things that I would say about them, maybe some qualms or some critiques, these are the books that are the most impressive from the year. The next tier down is Cotton Eye Joe. This is the scene where Nick is showing Jess his favorite song. She doesn't really get it, but he's just vibing.
Why did you need me for this? Yeah?
These books would also be very highly recommended from me. I had a very excellent time with them. There's something about them that didn't quite push them to the top tier, but still incredible stories. The next tier down we have Cookie. This is the scene where Schmidt had given Nick a cookie earlier in the episode, and so he comes back with one of his own and he says,
I gave you a cookie. You gave me a cookie, gave you cookie. Gave me cookie, got you cookie. You gave me cookie, I got you cookie, man. Gave me cookie, got you cookie. We're even. We're even, Schmidt.
These are the stories that I had like still a positive experience with, but it's more like a neutral kind of I got out what I put in or what I expected to get out of it. That was it. And I was happy with that, but it wasn't anything crazy. There was either something that kind of held it back, or I maybe was just not in the mood for it. Then our bottom two tiers are the truly kind of negative ones. Aquarium Rocks is a reference to the episode where Jess is convinced that she has a bag of meth that she has been hiding in her closet. She realizes at the end of the episode that it's not meth, it's aquarium rocks. But there's a period of time where everyone is convinced that they have illegal drugs that they need to get rid of because Winston is trying to become a police officer. And this is the day of the home visit where a cop is coming over to interview everyone and kind of see Winston's living situation. She has a breakdown, her hair is crazy, everything is kind of falling apart.
Right? It's gonna be fun.
Jess, are you crying right now?
I don't know, I hadn't noticed. I might be on drugs.
A bad time? Absolutely. But in this tier, it kind of is like it was a bad time and a negative experience, but looking back, it's kind of a moment. It's kind of iconic. It's that kind of realm of so bad that it's good in a way. Would I repeat it? No. But looking back, it was a moment. Then the final tier, we have Thumb Ring. This is a reference to the pilot where they're trying to get all of Jess's stuff back from her ex. He's being stubborn about like a t-shirt, and Schmidt comes forward and slaps him in the face.
Schmidt happens. Ah! What's in your hand? Dumb
These are the books that were such a bad time that not only did I feel like I got slapped in the face, but slapped in the face with a thumb ring. Just the worst of my year. Now, like I said, this was truly a mood year. So that meant that a lot of these, luckily, were hits, but some of these books are kind of hard to rank because I just was in such weird places that maybe I would have liked them better or worse if I had read them at a different time. So these rankings are going to be not necessarily critical critiques of the literary merit of these books, but just an overview of my experience reading them in 2025. So I'd be curious to know if you have read these and you've had different experiences from me. Let me know in the comments. Let's go ahead and start. January, starting off strong. I didn't finish anything in January. Starting off really in February, we have Tweet Cute, and Tweet Cute is going right into no notes. That's an easy one for me. I had a really good time with this book. I've reread it several times. I wanted to start my year reading a book that I knew I would really enjoy to get me starting off strong. Tweet Cute is kind of like a modern day You've Got Mail, which is a movie that I adore.
I wanted it to be you. I wanted it to be you so bad.
You have our female main character, Pepper, and our male main character, Jack. They're teenagers living in New York, and they go to the same school. Pepper's on the swim team, Jack is on the dive team, and so they're in the same homeroom, and then they kind of run in the same circles regarding their sport. The anonymous online aspect of it is that Jack has made basically like a group chat app. He spends a lot of his time coding and developing and running this app that's really popular with the students at the school, but it's banned by the admin, so everybody kind of has to keep it a secret. So Jack and Pepper are communicating on this app anonymously because when you sign up, you're given like animal avatar. So they don't know that it's them. And then both of their families run a restaurant. The businesses start having beef with each other because Pepper's family runs a burger joint that is coming out with grilled cheeses. And that's what Jack's family specializes in. So there's all this drama about like maybe they stole some recipes or different aspects of the grilled cheeses from Jack's family's business. So they end up in this kind of Twitter war. The kids run the social media accounts essentially. Just had really good banter. It was a good amount of zany shenanigans, but then also more grounded themes of growing up and trying to figure out what you want from your life, trying to fulfill the expectations that your family has for you versus what you want for yourself, even if you don't really know what that is yet. I thought it was very relatable, even as someone who has already gone through that part of life. I still enjoyed revisiting that part of my history through these characters, and I thought that they were very charming and very endearing. So Tweet Cute, always a high recommendation from me. And Emma Lord in general, when I found her, I was like, oh, she kind of is like an Emily Henry for a YA audience. Both of those authors really balance interesting and kind of wild plots that are almost too unbelievable, but like in a fun way. And then these all of a sudden kind of grounded, almost somber, more serious topics that the characters grapple with. Emma Lord is definitely a YA author, and then Emily Henry is an adult author. My last book in February was also Emma Lord, and it was her novel When You Get the Chance. This is also a YA book, and it's going to go in Cotton Eye Joe. This book is about a girl named Millie who's super invested in theater. This book mirrors Mamma Mia.
Mamma mia, here I go again. My, how can I resist ya?
It's a really interesting thing because, first of all, Mamma Mia is kind of hard to mimic in a story, I would say, but this handles it really well. And I think part of that is that Millie is fully aware that she is doing Mamma Mia, and she kind of does it on purpose, which I think is the only reason why this book works. Because I think if she just was doing these things and not realizing the wackiness of it, I think it would have been too weird. But because she kind of is like, yeah, I know that this is unhinged, I thought it was great. And Millie is also very charming as a character. Like the connection to Mamma Mia implies, Millie was raised in New York City by her dad, and her whole life is theater. She's been trying to get into as many productions as she can. She's trying to figure out her next steps as far as college, but then she also decides that she wants to connect with her mom. Her dad doesn't really talk about her mom at all. She doesn't know anything about her. And for most of her life, she's like, yeah, that's just kind of how it's been. And she had felt like there were enough people in her life that loved and supported her, and so she didn't need that. But that has changed, and she wants to get to know that side of her history. And I wasn't raised by a single parent or anything, but I was adopted when I was a baby. And so this aspect of Millie's story was relatable and interesting to me because I would 100% understand that draw to that other side of your background. Even though her mom has nothing to do with her life and she doesn't even know who she is, she still wants to understand that part of where she comes from. So Millie figures out through like Facebook and a journal, I think, these three women that could be her mom.
We danced on the beach and we kissed on the beach and ...
And so she's like, I'm just gonna kind of like insert myself into their lives. And that sounds like a little extreme, but she finds ways to befriend these women. And she's like, I'm just gonna get close enough to them that I can ask them or figure it out on my own from context, and we'll go from there. She has a plan, but also not really. It's kind of interesting seeing her explore like these new social circles that she's trying to navigate. And then also, while all this is going on, she's doing an internship with this guy from her school, and they have been very combative throughout their years together. And so they're kind of running around New York doing all of these like assistant intern sort of things. There's a lot of things going on, but it's very charming, it's very fun, and it was a good time. I enjoyed it. We are now going into March. The first book that I read was my last Emma Lord. I wanted to read more, but my library just didn't have a whole lot of her books. I own Tweet Cute, and then When You Get a Chance and this one, The Breakup Pact, was available in my library. So far, that's all I've been able to get my hands on. So we'll see in 2026 if I pursue that again, but I haven't decided yet. So The Breakup Pact, this is Emma Lord's debut adult novel, and it's going to go in Cookie. I think the reason this is not higher is because I read it so soon after some really solid YA titles from her. But I had a really hard time remembering that these two main characters were adults. I kept picturing them as teenagers, and that kept throwing me off. This is a fake dating plot where our two main characters have both been through very public and viral breakups. I think June and Levi are their names. Let me look. Yes, June and Levi. June's breakup happens on a reality TV show. I think her reaction to it is also very publicized. And then Levi, I think, was dating like a very famous actress or celebrity or something. Their breakups are very public, and that sends them back to their hometown. We learn that they used to be really close but have drifted apart, and this kind of brings them back together. They end up being photographed one of the first few times that they're talking and reconnecting, and it goes viral. And they kind of realize we could maybe use that to our advantage. They want a little bit of revenge, and then Levi in particular wants to use this as a way to get his ex to change her mind and take him back. So they start going on dates in order to be photographed and go viral and take back the narrative because they're both embarrassed about how their breakups went. A lot of the time in the book is also spent at a tea shop. June and her sister really wanted to open a tea shop, and her sister actually did it. When June goes home, she goes home to like run the business because her sister passed away a few years before the novel starts. The tea shop has not been doing well. Part of the reason she comes home is to pick that back up and get it going again. She's caught between outside pressures that are like the only way you're going to save this shop is to change it and update it and make it better. And then her own internal thing of, I need to preserve it because this is what my sister dreamed it would be. I need to keep it the same because that's how I'm keeping her memory alive. When I read this book, I enjoyed it, but I also went back and forth between a little bit of boredom, a little bit of these characters kind of seem like teenagers to me. I felt myself being taken out of the story a little bit and thinking about it a little too much, maybe, compared to the other two, where I was enjoying the vibe so much that I was like, you know what, I am gonna ignore any sort of unrealistic aspect of them. Still a good story, but I think because this one was an adult, I think I compared it a lot more to Emily Henry than the other two. I thought that Emma Lord's adult fiction was just not as strong. And maybe that is an unfair comparison, and I can acknowledge that, but that's just kind of where my head was at. My next read, I decided I needed a break from contemporary romance, and so I went to sci-fi. I turned to Neil Shusterman. I am going to also put this really easily up in no notes. Neil Shusterman is one of my favorite authors. I have read Scythe and Unwind several times. I got to hear him speak a couple years ago. I just really enjoy his stuff. All Better Now, I was really anticipating this release. I knew it was about some sort of virus or sickness or something. I don't know why I didn't make this connection in my brain to COVID. This is a pandemic novel. And so I had actually a kind of difficult time getting into it at first because I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to read a book about a pandemic. You know, I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. In the world of this novel, COVID happened, and then a couple years down the road, there's a new pandemic that's going on. So I thought it was interesting that he didn't shy away from COVID at all. In fact, he worked it into the story to talk about how society did XYZ for COVID, and now here's how this one is different. The pandemic in All Better Now is one that is, if I'm remembering correctly, a lot more contagious than COVID and a lot more deadly. However, if you survive this virus, your mental health is completely fixed. Hence the cover. It takes some of the arguments that we had during COVID and it separates them, but also makes them a lot more nuanced because now people are like, well, there's a little bit of an incentive to getting the virus because if you survive it, your life gets so much better. You're not just happier and don't deal with any sort of anxiety, depression anymore, but you also become like almost like an enlightened person. Like you become very selfless. Your motivations and your goals change completely. A lot of people sell everything they own and go live somewhere where they can help marginalized community or third world countries or something like that. So a lot of things are changing about the world. You have these different opinions about the virus, right? Some people are like, we need to treat it like we did before and quarantine and make sure that nobody gets the virus and that we maintain the status quo as much as possible. And then you get people who are like, we should just let everybody get it. Now there is truly an incentive to let that happen, to bring this new evolution of society. That's how they view it, is like the next step in the evolution process.
Yeah, people are gonna die. It's just terrible, but like, inevitable?
And then you have people that are like, absolutely, I do not want that because I will not be myself if I go through that process and become enlightened. That takes away my identity, that takes away my purpose and my individuality. I don't want that to happen to me. You have all of these different camps of people with different opinions on what to do. So the book follows three main characters, completely different backgrounds, very different opinions on the virus and what it means for their world. And throughout the book, they start off on their own journey and then they connect in different ways. It becomes this very interesting way of exploring something that truly does affect every individual in society. Schusterman is one of my favorite authors because he does a really good job of taking these really intense, sometimes a little scary sci-fi concepts concepts and exploring them in a way that's not preachy or judgy. I just have always appreciated the nuance and complexities. He manages to fit in a lot of different ways to approach one thing, and he never reveals his own opinion on it. He's like, this is how this character reacts to this. This is how this character reacts to this. This is how that character does it. I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong about those things. Schusterman gives the character space to have their own versions of morality, and it's interesting that he just lets that be. I think that adds to the complexity of the story, and it adds to the critical thinking that you as the reader get to approach the story with. I found that that's a common thing in all of his books that I've read, so I really liked this. Okay, the next books that I read were the Cruel Prince trilogy. I'm just going to sort all three at once and then I'll talk about them. Okay, they're all going to go in Cotton Eye Joe, I think, and I will put Cruel Prince, Wicked King, and then Queen of Nothing. I think that's how I want to put it. When books do not have very clear, this is year one, this is year two, this is year three, or something chronological for me to really separate the three, I have a really hard time remembering what happens in each book. But here's kind of what I'm thinking. The Cruel Prince is about Jude and Cardan. Jude is a mortal who is taken from the real world when she's young by her fairy father, and she's brought to the Fey realms. She and her sister are raised there, and that obviously causes a lot of problems. They get bullied a lot from especially the other Fey. Their same, I think they're different ages, but kind of like their same maturity level, and therefore age time they're acclimating to this very different society and the rules that come with that and the dangers of being a mortal in these realms. Eventually Jude falls in love with Cardan. This is a true enemies to lovers arc, because at the beginning and kind of throughout the whole thing, they really do hate each other. You find out that there are very specific reasons why, especially Cardan, because he's one of the princes of fairy and he eventually rises into different levels of power, but so does Jude. And so it's really interesting because the power dynamics between the two flip-flop of like who has more power or influence over the other, not only in their relationship, but just kind of like in society in general. I really liked the politicking in these books. I think Holly Black's version of fairy, to my understanding, is more accurate to like the old original Fae literature. There's the thing with food, and then there's the stuff with lying. It's really funny because as a mortal, Jude can lie. She and her sister are kind of the only people that can do that. And so it's really interesting watching them interact with these people who can't lie, but are very tricky to get around that. It's very fun. I felt like the atmosphere of these books was really great. I really like the characters. I think that this is probably my favorite. That's intense to say. This is one of my favorite enemies to lovers. It doesn't do that thing where it's like, oh, I hate them, but I'm so attracted to them because they're so hot. And then they have all of these feelings from the very beginning, and then it transforms from there so quickly. I think that Jude acknowledges that Cardan is attractive because it's from her perspective, but she hates him so much that she does not care at all for quite a while. I don't even think that they have, my memory is so bad. I'm pretty sure that they don't cross into romantic interactions until book 2. Like, it's a lot more of a slow burn, and I think that helps make it realistic as a series like this can be. I had a good time with these. The ending of Wicked King made me really angry, which I think is why I put that one last. Yeah, I can't really tell you why I ordered these 3 the way that I did. I liked the scheming, I liked her spying, I liked a lot about the atmosphere and the vibes of these books. They were a solid time. So I read Cruel Prince and Wicked King in March, and The Queen of Nothing was the first thing I read in April. So the next book that I read was, in fact, Twilight. Twilight, I'm gonna put in Cookie. Here's the thing. Twilight is one of those things that was so big for the however many years that the books and the movies were coming out that it is still such an ingrained part of pop culture that you really can't escape it. Everybody that I know has some sort of opinion about Twilight, whether it's good or bad.
no Twilight.
Yes, Twilight.
I think that's just a really interesting concept. And so I've kind of toyed with the idea of rereading these books. I read them when I was in elementary school, went through a Twilight love phase and then a Twilight hate phase. I saw some fan art of Bella and Edward. This artist made the story and the characters look cool. It was very clear that she had taken her inspiration from the book and not the movie. She didn't just draw Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson, like it was Bella and Edward. And I had this moment where I realized I could not tell you anything about the books as books. My knowledge of Twilight is the movies.
Oh, so it's like the Twilight thing where
It's not like the Twilight.
where
no,
the
it
vampire
isn't. You
falls
don't
in
really
love with
get
a regular
You don't
person.
get it.
It's the same thing.
Oh,
Well,
really?
look.
Is there another guy in Twilight that there's a bit of a love triangle with?
Yes.
Let me.
It's the same
Does
as Twilight.
Twilight have a wolf in it?
Yes.
It does.
Yes.
Is Twilight in Seattle?
Yes.
So I was kind of interested to reread them to see how they are after 20 years of being out in the world, but then also in comparison to the movies, what is actually in the book. So I went into Twilight very curious, and I knew that I was not going to think of it as like a literary masterpiece. I knew I was going to think of it as kind of a bad book, but I was really surprised by this actually. This first book is a pretty good time. Bella and Edward, I was very shocked by how funny they were because they are so petty. I remember there's this scene, they've started talking, but they don't know each other very well. Bella is like getting in the car to leave school for the day, and Edward cuts her off in the parking lot and then glares at her in the rearview mirror for like a couple of minutes. And I was like, that is the most unhinged thing. I was surprised by a couple of things about the characters, and I also, being older and things, I understood so much more about why Bella's character is built the way it is when she describes her upbringing of like basically having to take care of her mom and clean the house and cook the food and kind of be the parent and run the household, and then moving so that her mom could do what she wanted to do, and when she does get to Forks, kind of trying to like make sure she's not being too disruptive for Charlie and fitting in. That's like the most parentified I've ever seen a fictional character, and so it 100% makes sense that when the hottest guy at the school starts paying attention to you and then not only pays attention to you but like is super protective and like wants to do all this stuff for you, that makes sense why someone who is having to be the adult finally gets to kind of be a teenager. Bella's obsession with Edward makes a lot more sense to me. Edward's I wasn't sure about, but there's a moment in Breaking Dawn that I think explained a lot of that as well. Another thing that surprised me about this first book, they are all over each other. Like they're constantly like being very close and like kissing, and not in like a graphic way or anything, but I was shocked by that because the movies make it such a big thing that they can't be close, and they like really draw out that tension, and they only have a handful of kisses throughout those first 3 movies specifically. I was really surprised by that. I was like, these characters feel like teenagers. It felt different from the book in a way that I was pleasantly surprised by. So it still goes in Cookie because it is Twilight. Is it well written? No. I had a really hard time with the ending specifically because the whole thing with her going to Arizona and trying to get away from Alice and Jasper to like meet at the ballet studio, as soon as Bella starts making decisions, because a lot of people say that she's a passive character, and I agree, but not to the extent that a lot of people say. She does have desires and she does make decisions. They just all align with Edward, and they also don't make a whole lot of sense. As soon as she starts trying to kind of make things happen on her own, you lost me. The plot kind of fell apart for me at the end, but I was pleasantly surprised by my experience with this first book. So from this point, there were a couple of things on my list. What ended up happening was the next couple of books and series flip-flop between each other, and that all has to do with what was available at the library when. I read Twilight because I was waiting for Happy Place by Emily Henry, and that is also going to go in Cookie. That's going to go at the top of Cookie. And the only reason it is here and not higher is because I read Great Big Beautiful Life at the end of the year, and I, going into that, was like, oh, I'm excited that I'm reading an Emily Henry book this year, because I legitimately forgot that I read this book. And I don't really know why. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't up to what I wanted an Emily Henry book to be. Funny Story is still my favorite Emily Henry book. And so I think this is kind of lower than maybe it would have been if I had read Happy Place before Funny Story, because my expectations had been raised and then this one just did not hit for me. Trying to really remember why. I think this one is about this girl and her friends have a very specific place. I think it's in Maine that they go. It's like this vacation home that one of her friends' family owns, and it is their happy place. They go there every year. It's like their home away from home. It's the place where they're the happiest. Our main character has been going to, I think, medical school for the last couple of years, and she has just been grinding and miserable, and so she's really looking forward to this trip. She and her longtime boyfriend, who is also in this group of friends, they have broken up, but they haven't told anybody. And so she's going to this place. She's gonna try to break the news when everybody's kind of just waiting for them to get married. Throughout the book, they're pretending that they're still together, but then also realizing that maybe they're not done being together. This might be the last time that they get to go to this place all together. There was just something about it. I really liked the setting, but I wasn't as invested in the characters and the relationship. And I remember being vaguely disappointed and vaguely happy with it. And it's hard to even say that because honestly, while I read it, I was probably having a better time. But in my memory, it's gone down. Okay, so here at the end of April is when things get a little weird. Technically, I recorded The Hunger Games in May, but I really finished it at the end of April. I taught it to my 7th graders, the first book. That was an interesting experience. It definitely gave me some new insight into the book, and 100% it is going in no notes. The Hunger Games is iconic. I don't even feel like I really need to explain it. I think everybody knows what it's about. I'm also realizing I never explained what Twilight was about. I just assumed. So, The Hunger Games, you've got Katniss, who's competing in these games to the death. She had to volunteer to save her sister. It's her surviving this battle royale in very extreme circumstances. With my students, I always try to do kind of a little bit of author background to give a little bit of context for why the book was written, why it has stayed around in pop culture, or why we teach it. I looked into not only Suzanne Collins's inspiration, which I had known about previously, which was she was watching TV one night, going back and forth between a reality TV show and coverage of the Vietnam War. I don't remember where I heard that for the first time, but I've known for a while that that's how she came up with the initial idea. What I did not know is that Suzanne Collins is really well versed in the just war theory, which is about what needs to happen in order for a country to be able to morally go to war in a way that is justifiable and a needed thing. I didn't realize how much she used that. It kind of reminded me that Suzanne Collins is not a writer who came up with a cool idea and ran with it and came out with this book and then it got really popular, so she wrote 2 more. I think that Suzanne Collins really came up with this idea of showing how a society got to the point of revolution. I thought that that was a really interesting way to go into the book with a little bit more knowledge. I had a lot of fun with it. Sometimes teaching a book takes away my love for it because it's a difficult thing to do, to teach a book to kids that don't want to read it. But The Hunger Games, not only does it still hold up almost 20 years later as just as good as when I first read it as a junior high student myself, it's just one of those stories that I think is going to stick around for a long time. And there's a reason for it. I love that she does not shy away from the fact that Katniss is kind of an unlikable person. She's very gruff and she's very cynical and hardened by her experiences in a way that totally makes sense. And you still root for her just like you would a very likable person. And I think that's what a lot of people try to do now in their work. They're too afraid to make their characters truly unlikable. Even villains. Sometimes people are too afraid to make people truly villainous. Not that Katniss is supposed to be because she's the protagonist, but Katniss still makes like really intense decisions and does things that your typical protagonist wouldn't ever do. I appreciate The Hunger Games very, very much for what it is. So, end of April, beginning of May, we were finishing this up at my school. However, the end of April is when I had my baby, and this was very unexpected. I had my baby at 30 weeks. It was one of those days where it started out fine, but I felt that we needed to go to the hospital and had my baby that night in an emergency C-section. So that kind of disrupted my reading a little bit. I did not read for several weeks after that, but I did get a Kindle for my birthday. My birthday is a few weeks after my baby's. Eventually, I was healing. My baby was in the NICU for over a month, and so I got my Kindle and I loaded up some books and connected my library card, and I looked for something that I could read while sitting in the NICU with my new baby. That was a very intense experience for me. I really was just looking for a book that would just keep me going, keep me engaged with reading, distract me a little bit. When I wasn't holding my baby, I was reading. And what I read was One Dark Window. These are going to go in Cotton Eye Joe. I think I'm actually going to put this one here. Well, yes. I'm going to put One Dark Window here, and then I'm going to put its sequel, Two Twisted Crowns, I'm going to put right there. I don't love that I just split a series, but I think that is how we're going to do it. One Dark Window, there are these cards that give you powers. The power structure of their society is kind of who the king has allowed to own or borrow these cards. It's this very dark, very gothic fantasy. I'm so bad at even remembering the plot, especially this first one, because of what was happening in my life. Our main character, Elizabeth, she's just trying to kind of live her life, but the problem is she has this monster that kind of lives in her head and it talks to her. There's a blight happening in their town. And so they have to figure out how to use the magic to like save themselves from an element of the magic, if that makes sense. She kind of falls in love with like the captain of the guard kind of character, Raven, and I liked them fine. I think my favorite part of this first book was Elspeth's relationship with this monster in her head and kind of her trying to navigate the different aspects of the magic system. I thought that it was really interesting. Parts of it were a little predictable, but that might have just been me checking in and out at various points and not really immersing myself in the world as much as I maybe would have if I had read it at a different point. And then right after that, I read Two Twisted Crowns. And this one was really interesting because it brought forward Elsbeth's sister, Ione. I don't know if that's how you say it. And then Elm, who's one of the princes. I liked their love story and their characters so much more than Elsbeth and Raven. I don't know if that's just because Elsbeth and Raven's characters was like, okay, I've seen characters like this before, even though the situation was very different and they were unique in their own ways. The roles that those characters played I felt was a little familiar, whereas Ione and Elm, they kind of came out of nowhere, and I really liked getting to know them better and seeing them fall in love, and then them having such a big impact on the plot overall. Elspeth and Raven kind of take a step back, and Ione and Elm continue the plot until they can kind of come back. It was an interesting thing. Usually I really dislike that when you have groups of characters and you start with one and then it shifts to another. And so I was surprised that I liked this book so much better than the first one. There's a twist with Ione specifically that if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. It was really intense, very surprising. I had guessed like half of it, and so I was like, oh, that's cool. But then it kept going and I was like, oh, that's crazy. I was surprised by these two, and they really helped me through honestly one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. So they get very good props from me for that alone. So then going into June, we go to Catching Fire. And Catching Fire, I am sure won't surprise very many people, is going to go in no notes. And I like this better than the first one. I wasn't sure if that would still be true. I feel this way about both the movies and the books. Catching Fire really does just take what you want from the Hunger Games and just kind of dials it up a little bit more intensely. I think it's such an interesting question of like whether they were sent in on purpose or whether that just happened to to be what the Quarter Quell was, that they would draw the names from the victors. I thought it was a really natural way to explore what happens to the victors as time goes on and you see the different traumas that surviving their games has given them. I feel like I don't need to say very much about this book either, honestly. It introduces a lot of solid characters that remain in the series. It continues a lot of the themes in a really great way. It's entertaining. I like the arena so much more. And I think it's a really good starting point for the rebellion so that Mockingjay doesn't come out of nowhere. I like that so much of the revolution is put into Catching Fire, and I kind of forget about that every time that I read this or watch this. I read this after we had brought our baby home and I was kind of settling into a new normal. Once again, I needed something that was going to keep me going and also bring me something to look forward to by continuing a series. I thought it was great. So no notes for Catching Fire. Also in June, I read New Moon. That's also going to go in Cookie. I went back and forth between whether I liked it better or worse than Twilight. I don't think I ever really came to a conclusion. Once again, I was surprised by how much more personality the characters had. However, I disliked Jacob. I think part of it is that he's a lot younger. Not a lot. And like Edward is so much older than Bella that like it doesn't really matter. They just kept making a point that Jacob is, I think, close to 2 years younger than Bella. And I don't know why, that just the way that it was mentioned, I think it just made things weird. And then of course you have Edward leaving Bella because he's afraid that, you know, being a vampire, he's gonna hurt her and that whole ordeal. I'll still say this. I think it's really interesting, those 3 blank pages that represent the months that she was in like a really comatose depression. As someone who has struggled with depression, I thought that that was a really interesting way to just show she's completely disconnected from everything that's going on, that it might as well not have happened. That's a really interesting way to visually show that on a page. I liked that it was a unique thing. I think if I had read Twilight and New Moon for the first time, they would go lower than they are in this ranking. But because I knew going in what they were and my expectations were so low, that I had like a pleasant surprise with both of these books. And I also think that as I read this series, less so with the other 2, but with these first 2, I understand why they went as viral as they did and why they're so ingrained into our pop culture. They are easy to read. It's easy to imagine. The world building is not hard to grasp, but the kind of mythology, and I know especially with the tribal stuff, there's some controversy and not great things about that, but I think that that made it so interesting for so many people to read. If you know nothing about YA books or fantasy books or whatever, it appeals to a lot of different readers. It's an easy in. If you're looking to get into reading, it's an easy in. It's kind of like junk food. It scratches an itch. It just does. And I think if these books came out today, I think they would fit right in. And maybe that's just a testament to say that some of the romantasy and other sort of fantasy books that are coming out right now, they are trying to capture what Twilight did for that generation of readers 20 years ago. There's just something about them that draws people in and keeps them there. I don't know what it is about them. They just have a quality. All right, my next month is July. July, August, and September were my favorite months of reading. So pretty much everything is going to go in the first 2 tiers. First of all, we have Mockingjay. I think that Mockingjay still goes here because I've always said my ranking for these 3 Hunger Games books is Catching Fire, The Hunger Games, and then Mockingjay. And I think that that still stands. However, I remember when I first read Mockingjay as a teenager, I thought that it was boring, especially in comparison to the other 2. I remember thinking that it was so lame, that Katniss just was in District 13 and the rebellion has started and she is so checked out and she's just finding hiding places to just sleep and mope and do nothing. Then she's brought into the rebellion as the Mockingjay kind of against her will and she doesn't want to do it. I thought that was so lame as a teenager, but being older and revisiting this, my opinion changed so much. I was like, this makes so much sense because Katniss is not someone who wanted to be in any of the situations in the first place. She just happens to have the skills required and the fame needed to fill this role. And I think that's something thing that's also talked about in Sunrise on the Reaping. This idea of it really didn't matter who it was, it's just the stars had to align, and then these things could happen because the revolution was inevitable. And I think that that was such an interesting way to revisit this book. The devastation of losing District 12 and then see how things will change and be different later on. I still think I like the other two more, but I appreciated this book so much more than I have in the past, and that was really cool for me. After that, I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and that one I think is gonna go here in Cotton Eye Joe, but at the top of Cotton Eye Joe. I remember when this book first came out, I was not interested. I had a really big Hunger Games phase when I was in junior high. I absolutely loved it, but when this came out, I had seen enough authors and movies go back into prequels, and I had bad experiences with them or just wasn't interested. And so I'll admit I kind of saw this as a cash grab, another villain origin story that I had been tired of with how many movies came out with that kind of thing. And I didn't care about President Snow. I didn't care enough to know anything more about him. So I passed on it, and I never really had a reason to go back. But when I knew I was going to teach the Hunger Games last year, I was like, what a great time to not only revisit the full original trilogy, but then read these two other books that she's come out with. So I read it, and I was very surprised. Once again, I realized Suzanne Collins did not just write this to write it. She had things to say. I enjoyed it more than I thought that I was going to. It wasn't quite up to the original trilogy. It scratched the itch that the Hunger Games did for me, but it didn't quite get to the level that the trilogy was. I remember seeing the labs and creating the different mutts and stuff. I remember thinking that was kind of interesting, but there was something about it that just felt a little bit off to me. I did really like the story of Lucy Gray. I thought the introduction of the Covey and the vague connections that they might have to Katniss's family. I like that he cheated several times to like help make Lucy Gray more successful in the games. I thought it was really interesting how President Snow was. I thought that his psychology was explained very well and explored in an interesting way. Like, here was his family's experience in the war, and then how that left the family destitute, but they still have like their family name and their pride, and that drives everything that he does, seeking power and prestige and wealth and notoriety and all of these things, and how it went from being for his family to just being something that he wanted for himself. I think my favorite aspect of it, though, was the origins of the games themselves, and seeing that they were not the spectacle that we see in the 74th and 75th in Katniss's trilogy, that they didn't start out that way. I think that that was a very realistic portrayal of how something like that would evolve, and I thought the origin of it, the twist that you learn with that, was very fascinating, and answering the question that I think we all had when the trilogy came out, which is how in the world do you get to that point? How does that become something that so many people not only accept but then look forward to in the Capitol? And I like that it wasn't the first one, it was the 10th one. So you see a little bit of the history, and then kind of this being like the turning point of making it more of a spectacle. And I thought that was a realistic way to do the whole prequel problem, where like they force in Easter eggs of like, oh, here's how that character got that one part of their costume, or they said the line or something like that. I thought that this was a really natural way to work in some of those things and some of the characters that return. I thought it was an interesting way to show where things came from and how things progressed in the 60 plus years between this and when we meet Katniss later. While waiting for Sunrise on the Reaping, I read another series that I had really been looking forward to, and that was Red Rising. Red Rising is going to go in no notes as well, and I will put the first two where I want to put them because I read these back to back, and then we'll get to Morningstar in a second. So Red Rising, I had heard whispers of for a couple of years. I had heard the name, but I was never in a bookstore and saw it, or saw it at the library, or saw that it was available. Like, I was never in one of those spaces where I was like, oh, I've heard about that book, let me pick it up right now and give it a shot, until now. And I loved this series. I think I can say this was my favorite read of the year, the trilogy as a whole. I don't really know what what I want to say about it because it's one of those books that starts off so small and then grows and grows and grows and grows in a way that I really don't want to say a whole lot about it because I think it's one of those things that you just need to experience. And I know that that's so lame, but what I will say, Red Rising follows Darrow, who is 16 at the start of the book, but there's quite a few time jumps even within the first book. He lives on Mars and he is working down in tunnels in the planet to mine this very specific mineral or element or something. I can't remember how they classify it, but it's needed for the terraforming of Mars. So him and his family and like everybody that he knows have been in Mars for generations, and they have like their own unique traditions and culture, all of these things that go along with living in Mars and having the jobs they do in order to terraform the planet so that other people can come from Earth and live there. Darrow is what's called a hell diver, meaning that he drives the machinery that digs into the planet in order to find this element. In order to do that, you have to be a risk taker, you have to be a quick thinker, and you have to be very brave and kind of daredevilish-y because it's very difficult to work the machinery. You have to be very dexterous with your hands and very quick on your feet because the drills move very quickly. It's a very dangerous job. And he says that there are no old people where he lives because you die young, and that's just kind of how life is for them. That's really all I can say. It actually is kind of a really interesting mix. It's got Hunger Games elements, it's got Ender's Game elements. They call it Red Rising because there's like all these different colors instead of like races. Everyone is divided into colors, and they all have different jobs and functions in society based on their color. And so Darrow is a red because he is on Mars. That's the lowest of the low. Gold is the highest, and they kind of rule over everything. And so it's kind of him navigating more of his world. They deal with a lot of power dynamics within groups of people and like who gets the power and why and how do you take it back. It's a really great series. Super enjoy it. When you look at my list, I tend to read a lot of YA books written by women, and I do have male authors that I really enjoy. Rick Riordan, Neil Shusterman, Brandon Sanderson, to name just a couple. But this book, really, when I started it, it kind of was like getting punched in the face. Like, this is a 16-year-old protagonist who has a really rough life, and it's written by a male author. So the tone and kind of the vibe of this book took me a minute to get into, but then once I did, I was like, this is incredible.
I am feeling the effects of masculinity right now. I feel the testosterone. I want to go to war! I want a lightsaber! I'm a man! War!
So I'll talk about Morningstar and kind of the end of it in a minute, but we're gonna switch back here to Sunrise on the Reaping. Where do we want to put this? I think I'm gonna put it right here. I think I'm gonna put it in the middle of the original trilogy. But I think it's maybe more on par with Mockingjay instead of in front of it, if that makes sense. I loved it. I know a lot of people criticize it because they wanted something different and then it was just another Hunger Games. I kind of assumed that that's what it would be. I mean, because it was marketed as Hamish's Games. So I was like, okay, it's another Games, right? So I went into it with that expectation, and that helped me a lot. The angle with propaganda and editing media to promote a specific narrative and twisting the truth and creating new truth and perpetuating lies and all of these things, I thought was explored in a really interesting way. I remember being so curious before I read this because I was like, but in Catching Fire, didn't they say what happened in Hamish's Games already? Why are we getting a full book? But then reading the full experience, like, it makes sense why Hamish is so close-lipped about it, because you kind of assume that he doesn't talk about it because it's traumatic, right? Which makes sense. But then I think this book makes so much more sense because the version that is available to the public is so not it. And I guess I'm realizing that I'm spoiling it. Sorry. If you have not read Sunrise on the Reaping, sorry about that. You find out that at the end that Hamish's experience and what the Capitol sees are two very, very different things. I thought that that was such an interesting way to both add nuance to Hamish's character in the original trilogy, but then also give him his own story here. I thought that it bridged before Hamish and after Hamish really well to explain how he got from point A to point B, and I thought that it gave some interesting nuance with how he talks to Katniss and how he views Katniss in the original trilogy, giving him so many ties to Katniss that we didn't know about about until now. I think in a different story that would take away from it, but for me, it made sense that he wouldn't have acknowledged any of that in the original trilogy. I'm excited for the movie. It looks really good. The arena looks amazing. I'm excited. So now we get into September. The first thing that I read was Morning Star, which is the third Red Rising book. And that goes in no notes and was my favorite of the Red Rising trilogy. I already said a lot about it, so I will be brief here. But for me, Red Rising got better and better and better as I kept going. There was one thing about Morning Star, and if you know the series, you might know what I'm talking about. There was a part towards the end of this book where allegiances were in question and the characters made some choices to trust in someone and then go forward with this plan. And I was like, this seems really, really stupid. And then it played out with worst case scenario. And I was left being like, oh my gosh, did that actually happen? I feel like the stakes were high enough and things had actual consequences throughout the series that I was like, oh my gosh, that could actually be what's going on. Everything kind of had like another twist to it. And so it ended up, I was like, okay, like that makes a lot more sense. Okay, we're back on track. So there was a solid like 50 pages where I was like, there's no way. But then I was so pleased with how it went. Once again, overall, amazing story, awesome characters. The ending of this book was so perfect that I was like, no notes. I would not change a single thing about it. It was a very, very well thought out, well planned, well written, just great, great story. Next, I read The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon. 8 books are currently out. I split it up into 3 because the books, especially at the beginning, they're very, very short. So I combined some things. So I'm gonna put them out there and then I will explain. I think I'm gonna go here, here, and then here. Does that feel right to me? Yes, I think so. All right, so The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon follow the titular character as she moves to London in a house that she's supposed to inherit, and she finds out that her cousin has spent all of her money, and so she is trying to kind of regain her place in society, navigate some interesting family dynamics. She comes into her inheritance, and she's trying to start her life and navigate London society and all of these things. It is extremely quirky. It has a touch of magical realism. It takes place in the 1830s in London, and it's so much fun. Everyone that I have known who has read these books has loved them. So how I kind of split this up, over here at the end of No Notes, we have volumes 1 and 2. These are at the end because they're all set up, really, especially the first one. The first one's the shortest, and it really just establishes the characters. So I lumped 1 and 2 together. I was like, this is going to be a really awesome series, but we hadn't gotten to the good stuff yet. And so they're at the end of No Notes. There's nothing wrong with them, and I really enjoyed them, but I knew that it was just going to get better as we went along. Over here, the yellow cover here, that is meant to represent 3 through like 6. I just had such a good time with these middle volumes. It's just a joy to read them because everyone is so fun and so quirky in them, and Emma is just so charming, and she has goals, and she's witty, and she has banter with all these suitors, but it doesn't feel forced. She gains a friendship with these 3 different love interests, essentially. I definitely have an opinion on who she should end up with, but the dynamics between all of them are just really, really interesting. There are so many things about the town, like they throw a Julius Caesar play that in order to get tickets, you have to do a scavenger hunt essentially around the town. And there's a quality about these books that is just so fun. And I'll be doing a full video about these books very, very soon. So if that sounds up your alley, absolutely read them, and then also tune into the video that I'll come out with for those. The last ones though, and I can't remember exactly when this happens, but they go away to the country towards the end of what's currently out. And I really liked that part, but then it kind of led into some stuff that I'm not sure how I feel about it. Something happens that I knew would, but it doesn't feel the way that I expected it to feel. And so I don't know where the author is going to go with it. I think that these would rank higher if there was more to read and I knew a little bit more about where this certain plot element is going. But because we're stopped where we are, I'm kind of like, oh, I enjoyed that maybe a little bit less than the ones in the middle. So they're going in Cotton Eye Joe, volume 7 and 8. But I am so excited to see where this series goes. And I'm hoping that a lot more people pick this up and read it because it's very, very good, very worth it. Okay, we gotta talk about the two that are going in our negative ones. Eclipse is going in Aquarium Rocks. Listen, I hit October. So when I read Twilight and New Moon, my intention was going through the whole series. But I decided after reading New Moon, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna take a break. I was like, there are better things to read. And so I decided to take a break from Twilight. But then October hit, and I was like, I really want to read spooky books for the holiday. Halloween is my favorite holiday. And I was like, we'll read some fun vampire fiction to kind of get us in the mood for it, and then additional spooky books afterwards. And then I started actually reading Eclipse. I can't really describe the sadness that I felt reading this book. Eclipse was my favorite movie.
Battle scars.
When those were coming out, because I liked that it had more action in it with the newborn vampires coming in. I remember the training scene with the wolves and the vampires and all of that. Like, I really liked that. I think I just wanted some action from these books, and Eclipse gave it to me, and so that was my favorite. So I was looking forward to this. But then those first few chapters are just Bella complaining that Charlie got mad that she just straight up left to Italy at the end of New Moon, and she's just like, oh, I'm grounded and I can't see Edward as much as I want to, but it's fine because he comes to my room at night anyway. My life is just so much harder now that I'm grounded, and all I want to do is be a vampire, and I don't care about graduation. I don't know. I just was so wanting some more complexity from my vampire fiction, I guess. And then eventually, when we do get more lore with the other Cullens, I once saw a post, and I'm not going to be able to find it, I don't think, but I once saw something that said Twilight is pretty tragic because it has really interesting things in it, but it's about the least interesting people in the universe. And I think that that's very true, because every single one of the Cullens, Rosalie, Jasper, Alice, Carlisle especially, that's something I noticed rereading these books. Carlisle's story and motivations and experiences are so fascinating, and I just wish the story was about him. I think I really do. I get why it's Bella and Edward, but I feel like this book makes it really clear what a book in the Twilight universe could be, if that makes sense, because Stephanie Meyer created these other characters with such richer backstories, and maybe they just feel that way because they're summarized, and so you get the most interesting parts of them right away. But yeah, this book just made me sad, and I did not like it, but in a way that, looking back, the drop off to me of reading my favorite books of the year in the months previous and then dropping down to this, it was such a stark feeling that I just kind of look back and I'm like, wow, that really did happen. I also remember being quite surprised that the concept of imprinting was introduced as early as it was. One of the other wolves in Jacob's pack imprints on a 2-year-old.
Right to jail, right away.
And Jacob's like, that's weird. But then knowing what we know about Breaking Dawn, I don't know. There was a lot about it that I just really hated, but then a lot that I was like, that's really cool. So I don't really know what to do with that one. That is almost a thumb ring book for the beginning, but I think the end kind of changes it enough that I was okay with it. Okay, then Breaking Dawn. Breaking Dawn is going to go in thumb ring. I'm so tempted to switch these right now and put Breaking Dawn in Aquarium Rocks and Eclipse in thumb ring. I'm so tempted to do that, but I don't think I'm going to. Breaking Dawn bothered me for very different reasons. I was also very curious to see how the book was different from the movie, and that is the only reason I read this book. I remember sitting in the theater watching Breaking Dawn Part 2 and being shocked by the fight sequence at the very end. That was so iconic and so wild. And then remembering that that does not happen at all in the book. And I was like, there's no way that you bring those people together in a field and they really do just talk for a few minutes and then leave. And that's what happens at the end. That's exactly what happens. And it is the most anticlimactic, boring way, I think, to end a series like this that has these like superhuman, perfected, speedy, powerful, strong people. Like, I don't know. I also had a hard time with this one. Obviously, the imprinting thing bothers me to no end. But surprisingly, what got me was I realized that I have such a problem with Stephanie Meyer's foreshadowing. I was so annoyed. And I mean, it's hard to say because I already knew what happens in the story, and so it's hard to know if I didn't know what would happen, if I would feel the same way about it. But when Bella and Edward are at the island for their honeymoon, Bella starts to have your classic pregnancy symptoms. And it was such a drawn out thing, and I felt the same way in Eclipse. Something is looming on the horizon. In Breaking Dawn, it's her pregnancy. In Eclipse, it's the fact that Bella is the target of like this newborn vampire army. And the foreshadowing for it is so obvious and so clear and so repeated, and the characters are just like not picking up on any of it. In the book, it doesn't start until she like throws up, and then she realizes that her period is late, and then she goes to the pregnancy thing, and it happens bam bam bam. In the book, pretty immediately after they sleep together for the first time, Bella is like, wow, I can't sleep very well, and I'm having these really weird dreams. Also, my appetite is changing. There's a few more things. It just goes on and on and on for like several days. Then you get the throwing up, and then I think a little bit more time passes, but a bunch of stuff happens, and then they make the pregnancy connection. And you could argue that it's so far-fetched and impossible in their minds. They really are just gonna think, oh, like Bella is sick. I don't know. I just remember in both of these books being so annoyed, and in Eclipse it was not as egregious, and then Breaking Dawn, it just bothered me so much. I was just so annoyed about everything about the book at that point. There were a few redeeming things after Bella turns into a vampire. When talking about Twilight, I said that I understood why Bella is as obsessed with Edward as she is, and that made sense to me. Breaking Dawn actually gave a couple bits of vampire lore for this universe that I actually thought were really interesting. The way that she uses Bella to describe the experience of being a vampire, because it's like a new thing for her, was so interesting to me. And I'm not going to remember everything that I made note of as I was reading this, but she says things like every sense that she has is perfected and strengthened, right? So like obviously she can move faster, she can see better, she can think through things faster. Everything is faster and better, but it's also stronger. So she describes her emotions being so much bigger and deeper than everything that she experienced as a human. And I feel like that explains Edward's attachment to Bella a little bit better, because she's like the one person who he can't read her mind. And then also as a vampire, you just experience more emotion and it's more powerful. And so I was like, you know, I could see that like you're over 100, you're aimless, you're going to high school over and over again, and then a puzzle is presented to you, right? Someone who doesn't fit the mold, and you become curious, and then your emotions get involved and they're stronger than a human's. And so I don't know, that just made sense to me. And I also thought it was interesting, little things like her memories of a human feel like blurry and gritty compared to her vision and experience as a vampire. And so like it's a very clear line between her before and after. There were just things that were cool. And so I wish that Twilight was more of that and less of what makes it bad. The stuff that made it bad really just upset me. So that's why it's in Thumbring. Okay, the last book that I read around Christmas was the new Emily Henry Great Big Beautiful Life. I'm in between two spots. I think I am going to commit to that. I think I'm going to put Great Big Beautiful Life at the top of Cotton Eye Joe. I knew the criticism going into that this book is being compared to a Taylor Jenkins Reid book. I don't remember which one. I think it's The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I have not read that book. So I went into this one knowing that that was a criticism, but having no context for it. I was excited to read this one, and I really like Emily Henry a lot. I think that she has this really great talent of balancing really quirky plots with characters that are experiencing very grounded and relatable and just kind of human things. A YouTuber that I like, I think it was Carrie Can Read, she was describing Emily Henry as joyful books, and I agree that they're joyful books, but she said that the characters do really work through some difficult things, and so it feels weird to say that because you think about their emotional journey that they go through in these novels, and it's pretty dense, it's pretty heavy, but they are joyful books. And so it's this really interesting dichotomy between those two things, where the plot kind of unhinged sometimes and a little far-fetched sometimes, but the characters are so grounded and relatable that it works. So Great Big Beautiful Life follows these two writers. So the male main character Hayden is a Pulitzer Prize winning biographer, and Alice, our female main character, writes celebrity profiles for an online magazine. They both are trying to win a job with a woman who was once very famous and has now become a recluse. They're on a tiny little island, and so they start kind of running into each other and they eventually fall in love. The book is told through Alice. She goes back and forth between describing her time on the island, especially with Hayden, and then also going through these interviews with this woman that she's trying to work with, Margaret, and untangling, honestly, like her really sad life. It's a very fascinating book. She uses time and people and places to bring up these past experiences that these characters have naturally. So it doesn't feel weird when a character is like, oh, well, here's my traumatic backstory and here's, why I'm going to think about it for 5 pages. It doesn't feel out of place because they're going home for the first time in a long time, or they're seeing people they haven't seen in a long time. Something is naturally kind of bringing up those things. And so I really did enjoy this until I got to the end. I think this would have been a no notes if the ending had been a little bit different. One of my least favorite plot twists is used, I think, in a very natural and respectful way for the story, but that doesn't really change the fact that I don't like when that is used as a plot twist, and I won't spoil what it is. And then the kind of third act breakup, which isn't really even the third act because it was literally like 93 or later percent through the book. This big reveal happens, and so the writers split up and they're gonna go their separate ways, and then she goes home for like 2 months. Hayden kind of goes off and does his own thing. The problem had a very obvious source, and they're journalists. And so I was like, why in the world did he not go figure that out and then solve the problem? Even if he needed time to process and do some other stuff, it shouldn't have taken 2 months. And then even though it did take 2 months, everything happened like so fast. I just didn't like it. I felt like everything happened too quickly, or the twist happened too late in the story. And so then all these other things had to be tied up, and it just felt weird. I still enjoyed reading it, and I think Emily Henry is one of my favorite authors, but unfortunately the 2 books that I read, still positive, but not quite that no notes category. So there are my rankings of the books that I read in 2025. Not too surprising, I've been ruminating on how I wanted to structure or where I wanted to put things for a long time. I do have a couple of things that I want to say about some books that I DNF'd. The first thing is that my library did me dirty a couple times throughout the year. The Thursday Murder Club and Six of Crows were things that I had either in my holds or checked out. I was like 35 or 40% through the Thursday Murder Club and it disappeared. The library doesn't carry them anymore, and I'm so sad about it. I think I'm gonna leave Thursday Murder Club where it is because I watched the movie and I enjoyed that and I feel good with that. Six of Crows I'm hoping to read in 2026. I also would have read probably more books this year, but one of the audiobooks I was listening to was the complete short stories of Hercule Poirot by Agatha Christie, and that is like a 37-hour audiobook, and I'm still working on that. I've been really enjoying those, so it's not on this list because it's not done yet, but I want to talk about Agatha Christie in a future video, and so that's one thing that I am doing. Another is Challenger Deep by Neil Shusterman and Anne of Green Gables. These are ones that I started and enjoyed, but I got distracted by other things that I wanted to read a little bit more. I've read Anne of Green Gables before, and I'm really interested in Challenger Deep. It was kind of one of those things where it was like, right book, wrong time. My last one is Iron Gold. So if you're not familiar with Red Rising, it's 2 trilogies that are split. And so you have the first 3, and then there's a 10-year gap, and then you have the second set of 3. I had Iron Gold intending to start it a couple of times, and I just didn't quite get there. I think most of it was that I wanted space at first, and then I never felt like it had the brain capacity to come back to a book that is that intense. Now that I have gotten back into it, I think Iron Gold is going to be one of the first things, and the rest of the Red Rising series will be what I start the year with. So that's that. Those are some asterisk books. Those are my rankings. I hope you enjoyed hearing them. I have a couple things to say as an outro, but thank you for listening to all of my kind of rambling thoughts about the books that I read this year. Okay, real quick quick, I'm gonna pop back in to talk about some of the things that I'm excited for 2026. Some things that I really want to get back into. I want to read more Brandon Sanderson. I've talked in my rankings about how I got a Kindle for my birthday and I've been doing a lot of ebooks. We own a lot of Brandon Sanderson's works as hard copies. It felt silly to me to get an ebook version when I have the physical copies. And so this year, I'm hoping that I can kind of get back to reading some physical books, and Brandon Sanderson is where I want to start with that. I read like half of Elantris in 2024 and I really, really liked it. And so I want to start with that. And then I've read Mistborn and Steelheart, those trilogies. And so I want to get into the official kind of Stormlight archive this year. I've also heard very good things about Dungeon Crawler Carl, so I want to try that. There are some series like Emma M. Lyon and Yona of the Dawn that I will be continuing as those have new installments this year. Rereading as necessary. I'm not sure how much I'm going to do of that. Yona of the Dawn will definitely get a reread of the whole thing. Emma M. Lyon, maybe just the last couple. I'm not sure. I'm going to do a video on Emma M. Lyon coming, so I'll probably be doing a lot of skimming and going through for that, and that might suffice for preparing for volume 9. I'm hoping that comes out sooner rather than later because I'm so excited for that one. Other things, I want to read Wuthering Heights and a few other classics. I don't think I'm gonna watch the movie when it comes out, but I really enjoy watching people watch movies that I don't have interest in watching myself and hearing their thoughts and commentaries on it. So I want to have read the book when those commentaries come out. I think I'm gonna mostly do a continuation of what I did last year as far as my philosophy of reading, where I just am focused on books that will keep me engaged, that will keep me reading. I'll be reading books for videos and things like that. I'm hoping to continue enjoying reading, finding more like potential favorites, because I think that that is such a fun thing about reading. You have the books that are so foundational to who you are, but reading is a continual thing. And so there's always a possibility that the next book you're going to read is going to be your next favorite and the best thing you've ever read. And that's so cool to me. So thanks for joining me on this ranking. I hope you liked it. Let me know in the comments if you read one of the books that I've read, if you had different opinions on it than me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If there is something that I talked about in the rankings that made you think of another book that you think that I might like, let me know. I will see you
in the next video.